Everyone for bearing with us as we're getting the slides set up here. So we really appreciate all of you attending today. And moving forward, when we're having these webinars, we're going to be posting the information in Slack and also having the, if there's any communication that you would like to chat, so any questions or comments that you have, please go to the #training channel. Okay, if you hear us, David or Mindy, could you let us know if you can hear us? Because David's saying he doesn't have any sound. So David, can you? Oh, Megan, great. Can we get a second person letting us know that we're being heard out there? Thanks, Liz. Okay. So thanks, Karen. All right. So there's like really bad feedback. So okay. Okay, we're still having some technical difficulties and we're going to move forward. So basically, if you could just make sure that you're keeping yourself muted unless you're speaking, and we'll make sure to unmute you if you raise your hand and have a comment or question. We're recording this for those people who cannot actually attend and be present today, and we are actually going to start uploading that to YouTube. Since it's going to be kind of a large file, we'll send out that link, and we'll also link it on Slack so that you can send that to your specialists, and they can take a look at the information that we cover. So on Slack, if you have any questions during the meeting, you guys can just type it in there. All right, so Beth, you want to keep moving along?
Absolutely. Thanks for bearing with us on that. So I'm going to go over our mission and vision. As I'm sure you all know by now, our vision is that every young adult is educated, employed, and career-bound. Our mission is to equip young adults with the skills to overcome barriers and win in education, employment, and as citizens.
Okay, so the reason that we've kind of been messaging the importance of this webinar today is that since Mary Fowler has come on board, our executive administrator, she's really spent a lot of time looking through the data that you all are tediously entering into ENDMS, and we know that that is a very time-consuming and sometimes tedious process, as the little comic here can refer to. But the data that you all enter, we use that consistently, regularly to report out to our stakeholders, to potential funders when we're expanding our program, as Kristen consistently talks about during our O&I calls, our goals of expanding to serve more and more students and bring more and more specialists on board. So it's just really important that our data is accurate and also consistent, and so we just wanted to make sure that you all are getting a consistent, that you all are consistently, that certain data is being entered the same way, and that you're getting the consistent message from us of how it should be entered. So after we've had some time to look through it, we've made some decisions on things, and we just wanted to make sure that you all are on the same page. Primarily, we want to make sure that our data is telling the best story of the students and youth that we are serving, and telling the best story of the results that you all are achieving with our youth. And like I said, you're really the key to that in terms of ensuring that that information that you're putting into ENDMS is the most accurate as possible. So there's just a couple things we're going to go over today, and if you have questions, drop them in Slack. We'll pause a few times to make sure that you're all on the same page as us, and hopefully we will respect your time and ensure that we are out of here at 4:30 or earlier. So go ahead, Beth. Okay, so the first component that I wanted to address is when entering in the participant profile the section on parent education. And right now we are currently reporting statewide that about 53% of our youth or students, that they are what we call potential first-generation college students, meaning that neither of their immediate parents have achieved a bachelor's degree. We are pretty sure that this number is underreported, that that it actually would be more around the 80-85% mark. And as you all, since you are educators, know that this is a number that speaks very clearly to the youth that we are serving, and it's kind of a number that we use often when we're reporting. We know that this can be a hard number for you to get from your youth sometimes, especially, you know, the youth that you might be serving that are in foster care or have parents that are not necessarily present in the household. But when you kind of look at how high the numbers are for no response or unsure, we do think that we could improve those numbers if the specialists, once the relationship with the youth and families develop more, if you could go back into the profiles and update them and ensure that you're kind of entering that information as it comes to you. So again, we know that you're not going to get, you know, a 100% correct response rate from your youth here, but would really like these no response and unsure responses to decrease. So this again is when you're entering the student profile section and the for the drop down for mother and father's education. So that's one thing that moving forward we'd like to see a change in. And again, this is not a WIOA case file. You can always be entering information, changing, updating as you learn more about the youth that you're serving. And just make sure that, again, the profile is accurate as possible.
Okay, for barrier tracking, oh, and just to piggyback off of what Kara was saying about just keep in mind that your JMG files are separate from WIOA files so that you don't need documentation for everything you're selecting on their profile or as their barriers. So when it comes to that portion for entering their parent's education rate, you do not need proof of a parent completing high school or proof that the parent went on to college or proof that they dropped out. You just need that student to tell you what they know to be true. So if that's something that's been keeping you from selecting something, or if you've just been choosing no answer because you didn't have documentation of that, just keep that in mind, that their self-attestation is enough to select that. Okay, so moving on, we're going to look at, once again, on their profile, student barriers. So JAG's requirement is that we have a minimum of 3 barriers per student or per youth that are enrolled in JMG. If you scroll through and look at all the barriers, there are at least 3 barriers that should fit basically everyone. They're just like the baseline barriers. So if you go ahead and look through like has inadequate or no work experience, that one could apply to just about every youth that we're serving, and there are a handful like that. So just keep that in mind, that when you're selecting barriers, you need to select a minimum of 3 upon when you're enrolling students. Also,
So just to add on to that about the minimum of 3, that again is coming from Mary looking at our data and noticing that there are quite a few profiles that are not meeting the minimum of 3 requirements. So sometime next week, some of you specialists might be receiving a very friendly reminder email from Beth and I just saying, we noticed that in your profile there's not at least 3 barriers entered. If you could just please update that at your earliest convenience. So this is not at all to come down on you all. It's just to make sure that we are reporting in the best way possible. So we will be following up on this with some of you, and with most of you, you have easily met the minimum of 3 requirement, however.
thanks, Kara. So we talked a little bit about entering barriers and that we need a minimum of 3. Now let's talk about what we do with those barriers after they're entered. So there is also a standard that we need an average of 4 barriers removed per youth. And the way that we get that number is by you going in and putting in a removal date for that barrier. So some of the barriers obviously are never going to be able to be removed. For example, the barrier of, one parent didn't graduate high school. The chance of that parent working and completing their high school diploma, it's not very likely at this point. Not to say it won't happen, but just keep in mind several of them are never going to be removed. But when you do come across a barrier that you're able to either help that student overcome or they overcome it some other way, rather than going in and deleting the barrier, what you need to be doing is putting in a removal date. So that's the date that you first found out that that barrier is no longer an issue for that youth. If instead you were to go in and delete that barrier, we would not see that students are overcoming barriers. It would just reduce the number of barriers total. So just keep that in mind. Once again, that you do put in a removal date. You never want to delete a barrier. The only instance in which you would need to go in and delete a barrier is if it was never supposed to have been entered in the first place. So if it was just a mishap when you were entering the profile that barrier was ever entered, that's the only time in which that would happen. So otherwise, just go ahead and you'll be using the removal date section for removing barriers.
Okay, so in terms of also reporting accurately in the participant profile section, another descriptor that we often use of the youth that we're serving is economically disadvantaged, which is barrier W1. The screenshot here shows that at the bottom, it's usually right, well, it always will be at the bottom of the profile right before the save button, where it says as defined by public assistance, TANF, or free lunch. Essentially, this is you would have selected these in another section of the profile before you got to this W1 barrier. So if you select that a student is eligible for free lunch, or if you check TANF or public assistance on their profile, please also check this barrier. In an ideal world, if you checked that previously, it would automatically populate here, but that unfortunately ENDMS is not that advanced yet, so you have to remember to do that on your own. And again, you do not need documentation to scan and send to us to confirm the TANF or public assistance. You can simply just, if a student is reporting that to you, or you have that in their WIO case file or in their school case file, that's totally fine. We just want to ensure that we are getting as accurate data here as we possibly can. Okay, so at this point, we've kind of inundated you with a little bit of ENDMS stuff. Some of you may have heard before because we've kind of been talking about this for a couple weeks now. Are there any questions that we can answer? You can either type it in Slack or share in the old school way through speaking over the phone.
That's a weather, Lilo. Hello? Papa, what is that?
Okay, so if you're not, share the question if you could mute yourself. And just so we can reduce the feedback, I'm just going to.
Unmuted.
Steve, are you, okay, let's see here. Steve typed a question in Slack for, has dropped out of school previously. If they re-enroll, can we put the date they re-enter school as the removal date? As the barrier removal date. So I'm going to, yeah, I'm going to have Beth answer this one since I'm still learning. That's a great question. Thanks, Steve.
Okay, so no, that is not a barrier that you would remove because it's something that has happened in the past. That's a definite yes, they dropped out of school. You can't remove the fact that they dropped out of school. So anything that falls under that same sort of situation where it's something that happened in the past that you can't go back and undo is going to remain as a barrier. It's still something from their past that has potential to influence their current situation. So despite the fact that they have re-enrolled in school, which is fabulous, unfortunately we're not able to remove that barrier. So good question.
Hi, this is Carolyn.
Hi, Carolyn.
I'm going old school because I'm driving. Sorry. But the only question I have is when you remove the barriers, and this happened to me last year, and maybe I don't think you mentioned it, there's two different places to put in barrier removal. You can put it on the IDP and you can put it on the barriers separately for each student, you know, and they're dropped down like for each kid. Which is the best place to do it because they don't populate each other? Like if I put barrier removal and barriers, it doesn't show up on their IDP.
Okay, good question, Carolyn. So under their barrier, that's where we're going to get the information about number of barriers removed is under that barriers section. So you'll need to go in and do it there. And then for the IDP, that's where you're going to talk about how you removed the barrier. So unfortunately, you'll do it both places. Does that answer your question?
Yes, that's what I did last year. I just was really, really hoping there was another way.
Yeah, I'm sure it's not the answer you wanted. If I ever come across some trick or tip, I'll be sure to let you know how to make it cross-populate.
It would be nice if JAG National could do that, make it populate.
You know, I'm sure they've heard it before, but I wouldn't mind mentioning it to them again. So thanks for the question, Carolyn. Do we have any other questions before we move on, either on Slack or through your phone?
So Steve has another question here. What's the amount of time we want to wait after a student gets a job to remove a barrier of having inadequate or no work history? So that's one that's a great question. I think definitely a case-by-case basis, not something that we can give an exact answer to. So if it's I mean, I would think that for this one, I'd actually ask if there's any specialists on the call who have had this situation where, or or managers where a youth has had the barrier of having inadequate or no work history, and at what point have you decided that they have enough work experience to remove that barrier? If anyone would like to speak to that.
Hi, it's Carolyn again.
Thanks, Carolyn. Go for it.
I think it's a case-by-case basis. You know your kids. You know your students better than anybody. And I think that it's like I've had students who came back after a couple weeks or things like that, and they're getting along well. They're learning a lot. They're enjoying their job. They're clearly engaged, and they're going to keep that job. And I'd be like, okay, he or she's getting what is needed. They're learning what they need, they're demonstrating the skills. And other kids are like, oh my God, my boss is like so evil, and blah, blah. I wouldn't do that until they've been there for a while because they're not really getting what they need out of that job, in my opinion.
Great. Yeah, thank you for sharing. I think that's exactly what I was thinking, that once you get to know your kids, you'll get a great sense of kind of how much experience they need and how they're doing in their job placements. Yep, so we'll keep moving along. Any questions, you can just type them in Slack and we'll make sure to answer them before we conclude. So moving on to model services, this is something that some of you, again, we've kind of covered this a little bit in the O&I. We saw a lot of inconsistencies in terms of how often model services are being entered and which model service specialists are selecting for different activities. So model services should be entered at least weekly. Some of you will enter them more often than this, especially our multi-year and alternative specialists who are seeing youth and students on a regular basis. It'd be much easier for you to enter it more, and managers can determine if there's a different standard there. But our standard is at least weekly. In terms of the activity type, that document that I uploaded to Slack, the training channel, that says it's titled JMG Model Service Activity Descriptions. I will also upload it to our currently being reorganized Dropbox and send the link out, and that will be a resource for you. So essentially that document is a new updated version of the JAG document that tells you which activity you're doing with your students. Can you actually pull it up, Beth? It's in the Slack channel, the training channel. So some of you have seen this. We basically saw a need to revise this document. When we looked at the original JAG one, we saw lots of inconsistencies. A lot of our specialists explained that they would pick one activity for or one model service for one activity and so on. So that's something that we'd like you to use going forward, and if you find that there are activities that are not on here, go ahead and shoot me a Slack message and I will continuously update this document. If you scroll down to the third page on the back, there's a little table where you can read it the other way, and you can look up the activity on the left side. So for example, if you go to manufacturing day, that would be a field trip. If you do studying or makeup work with your students, that would be academic remediation. If you have fundraising for JMG Classroom, that's career association. So you can go ahead and look through there to determine which model service you are providing to enter into ENDMS. So again, this document, please refer to this. Moving forward, there's no need to go back in and change anything that you've already entered. Just moving forward, this will help standardize what you all are entering. And the narrative that you're entering should be about 2 to 5 sentences long. that's pretty much what we're seeing people do, but there's no need to type a full paragraph, and make sure that you're putting in more than just a few words in terms of model services. In terms of selecting competencies, when you are selecting competencies from the drop-down menu, you will see some that start with the letter O. Please do not select those unless you are an out-of-school specialist. Out-of-school specialist, please only select from the O1 through O20 competencies. The W90 through W99 competencies are also open to you. So multi-year and alternative ed specialists, please just do not select any of the O competencies. Essentially, those are just there for out of school. And the new standard also is a maximum of 10 competencies. There are a lot of specialists who enter 1 to 2, and then some specialists who are entering more than 10, which is just a huge discrepancy for our reporting. We talked about it and decided that if in one activity that a youth really isn't achieving a competency if there are more than 10 of them being entered. So just a maximum of 10 for each model service entry, please, moving forward. And again, no need to change anything, just moving forward, make sure that these are the standards you're following.
Can I ask a question about that real quickly?
Sure.
I'm Carolyn again.
Hey, Carolyn.
So, for example, I'm trying to enter more academic. I do a lot of stuff, and my problem is I do stuff and then don't enter it sometimes. But I'm doing academic remediation because, for example, I discovered when we were doing a game with our kids before Christmas that most of them don't know how to measure a ruler, to use like inches, 16ths, quarter inches, anything like that. So I spent a whole class period working with them on rulers and showing them how to do that. So I went into academic remediation, but then when I went into competencies, it gets a little dicey about what should I choose.
Okay.
I mean, I guess, I don't know, I mean, I'm trying to, let me if I found one. I put in, am I taking too much time?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think that I don't know the competencies well enough off the top of my head. I would have to, I think for, I'd really have to look through them with you to help guide you on.
I chose like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I chose a few of them, none of them all, but I chose a bunch of I chose like learning basic work skills, like I always do the verbal, understanding verbal directions, understanding written directions, all that kind of stuff, and understanding mathematics. But I don't know, I just want to make sure that I'm not, sometimes I'm like, what do I put? For stuff like that. That's all. Sorry.
No, it's okay. I think that, I mean, we trust your judgment, and a lot of this, it is a little bit, there is going to be gray area, it is going to be case by case, and so when it comes to that kind of thing, you know, no one's going to come down with a wooden stick if you pick, you know, one wrong competency for your measuring lesson. I think we're just giving some general standards and guidelines right now to kind of help keep things more consistent across the board. But I'm pretty sure that your judgment in terms of which competencies to pick, we trust you guys on that. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you. It does.
Okay. So one last little standard moving forward. These are just really, again, for when we're reporting out. A lot of times Mary will run information into Excel, and this just makes her job easier, so we'd appreciate if you all could follow this. When you're entering information specifically in the profiles, please use standard capitalization procedures. So essentially, don't use all caps and don't use all lowercase. So the first example there, so if it was Jan's name, you would capitalize the J and the E, and you don't need to use punctuation when entering like street If you do, it's not a big deal, but generally it just makes it easier when we're sorting things in Excel. So the non-examples on that screen there, please do not type in all caps or in all lowercase. And again, don't worry about fixing it. If you're in a student profile that has been typed this way, we'd appreciate it if you correct it, but you don't need to spend, a day going through and fixing how you've entered information. Just a standard that we want you all to be aware of. So again, any questions about anything we've covered up till this point?
Okay, well, if there are no questions, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit about progress reports. As you know, at the end of the year, you'll need to go ahead and enter progress reports, but we're coming up on the end of a semester, which means it's time to start thinking about mid-year progress reports for the 2016-2017 school year. So if you're a new specialist and you're not familiar with where to find this information to input it, or where to find an ENDMS that you need to put it in, it will be under the Enter tab across the red bar at the top. You'll select Enter, and then there will be a drop-down bar where you can select progress reports. You are able to go in and do it by individual profile or by individual student, but I find this to be the easiest way to go ahead. You can do batch entry, so you can enter everybody at once. They'll all show up. You'll want to make sure that you are entering under mid-year rather than end of year. There are a couple notes up here that I think people skip over sometimes, and that's just that data entered should be cumulative. This comes into play more at the end of the year when you're knowing which numbers to put in. It's not the number since mid-year, it's the full number for the whole year. And that suspensions and expulsions are to be counted as the number of instances, not the number of days that they spent. So just keep those two things in mind. You'll need to be in touch with someone at the school in order to get this information. So if you're not sure who you need to get it from at your school, now would be a good time to start figuring that out. These are going to be due the last Friday in February, which is February 24th. And if you are unable to obtain the information by then, please shoot an email to Kara if you're an out-of-school program, or it's a little different for out-of-school because the timing is a little different. But for in-school, especially if you want to just send me an email if there is some sort of an issue that you're not going to be able to have the information entered by then, just go ahead and let me know. So I'm going to pause for questions on this. So go ahead, just let me know if you have any questions.
I just want to clarify for out of school, this information is generally not something that we expect you to enter. If you have out of school students that are enrolled in some kind of GED program or something where you could get some information here, that'd be great, but it's not like you're in a school where you're going to be getting a stack of progress reports with all this information on, so we understand that challenge there. So those of you multi-year alternative specialists, please communicate with Beth around any questions you have here. Okay, we have a question from Matt. Is there a way to confirm that my model services have been entered for each of my students in ENDMS? So other than going back and checking in the system, I mean, the main thing I would suggest is just you would log back into ENDMS, and then you could, on the under the drop down on the side, you would select your school, the roster, you could click the student's name, and then actually click model services, and then all of the model services that you've entered with the date and activity, the length, and so on should come up for each of those for that student. You can also, so that would be one way to check it. And if, Matt, if you have additional questions on that specifically, we can I can go over that with you after the call. Are there any other questions? Progress reports, anything? Questions on anything that we've covered at all, or anything that anything on JMG related that an outstanding question that you that you are dying to ask? Okay. Upcoming dates, aside from having progress report data that Beth had clarified, is the end of February. We've got Legislative Day coming up. That information has been communicated directly to managers. So specialists, if you have not heard anything about that, don't worry. We've communicated with managers just to make the planning for it a little bit easier. Thursday, April 20th is our Career Development Conference. You'll be receiving more information on that. Make sure it's on your calendars. And moving forward, this, like we said, we did record this. If you're a manager, we will be sending out the link to where we upload it to ensure that your specialists can watch this webinar so they get this information, that they are following along with these standards as well. And the document that I uploaded, the ENDMS tip sheet in this training channel on Slack, also kind of is a one-page, just kind of reiterating this information as well. And so we've got a couple questions about the CDC and Slack, Beth, if you want to take a look. The first one, Megan, is asking how many, or do you have requirements ready for the commercial and video for the CDC?
Okay, no, I have not put those together. As you might, I'm not sure if everyone's aware, I just got back in the office after being out on maternity leave, so I haven't been able to put together our criteria yet for videos or for any of the events actually, but that will be coming out in the next couple weeks. So no, unfortunately I don't have that ready yet. Sarah had a question about how many students they'll be able to bring to the Career Development Conference. Yes, there will be a limit on the number you're able to bring. I don't have the numbers worked out yet, but I'll get them to you as soon as I do. There is, our venue has limitations on how many people we can have total, and we have many more programs this year than we've had in the past. So it's kind of like each year as we add more programs, the number of students that each program can bring, unfortunately, is scaled down. So last year it was based on your roster size. I'm not sure if we're going to go that route again this year or not, but more information will be coming along with information regarding which events we'll be doing this year, and how many students you're able to bring, and all the other details. It will be coming to you soon. So thanks for the question, though.
And still working on getting our keynote speaker. Any ideas, send them our way. We've been kind of looking into our connections for possible Detroit area connections to Eric Thomas. We'd love to host him for a small fee. If any of our Detroit area specialists or managers might know how we could connect directly to him, specifically, we know that if we could potentially communicate with him who he'd be speaking to and, the purpose of our program, we think he might be interested. But if anyone has any other ideas of someone that they've heard speak that they think would be exciting and interesting for our kids, we would love to send those ideas along. We'd love your input. So thank you all for taking time out of your very busy schedules to hear about data. We know it's not the most exciting thing. We'll stay on the line, Matt. We can make sure to answer your question. Okay, Eric lives in Lansing, so great. Thank you, David. So if anyone in the Lansing area has connections to him, as well. I know that he spoke at Michigan State. They have a much larger budget than we do. Wonderful, Sarah, you guys, okay, perfect. This is why we love our JMG statewide team. If you guys could follow up with Beth on that, she will be planning our keynote speaker. So if you guys could send her any information on how we could get a hold of him directly as opposed to through his website, because we kind of hit a dead end there. So again, thank you so much for the time. We'll stay on the line for questions that you might have regarding any of this, and have a wonderful weekend, and we'll talk with you all soon.